we wake, hear the birds and see the sun. Side by side our fears are done. Oh, the good times just begun.
Just realized that I was talking to myself because I wasn't recording, so let me try this again. So Joseph has gone through a lot of things over the past years, and I'm talking about years. And now he is at the top. He is, the right-hand man of Pharaoh. And I want to start off by saying, first of all, you can look at somebody and what they have, what they've achieved, and you can assume, wow, I wish I had that, or, God, I'm waiting for my breakthrough, and I'm waiting until, you bless me with that. And there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with looking at what they have, as long as you're not, being jealous or having any kind of negative emotions towards that. But there are two things. You don't know how much that person has had to go through to get to where they are, especially, when you're walking with God. You get all kinds of stuff thrown at you sometimes to test your faith. So you don't know what that person has had to do, what kind of dedication, sleepless nights that they've had to endure. I can think about, when I was in college, I had to put a lot of work in order to get that degree. And it's the same thing. So if you see someone and you're like, wow, I wish I had that. Well, you don't know half of what that person had to go through. Also, you don't know what that person is currently going through. Everybody has something that they are struggling with. I promise you, every single person on this earth. Doesn't matter how happy they look, how, rich they look. Not that that means anything at the end of the day. But everyone is struggling with something, everyone. And you just never know. And so if someone were to look at Joseph's life and maybe they would think, wow, he's got it all. But, they didn't know him. They didn't know that he went through everything that he had to go through in order for God to bring him to that point. So anyway, verses 1 and 2. So there's a famine in the land of Canaan where Jacob is. And so Jacob sent his sons to go get food in Egypt. So I wish I knew. I should have looked this up. I try not to look at anything at all. I try to just come to you guys with my own thoughts on Genesis. And so I kind of wish I looked up, the journey, how long it usually took from Egypt to Canaan. But either way, word got around that Egypt had food during this famine. And so Jacob sent his sons because they had no food. Verses 3 through 5. Jacob did not send Benjamin because he was afraid he'd be harmed. And I put, did Jacob suspect foul play with Joseph's disappearance? It's really sad when a father thinks that his sons had killed his other son. And he did not trust them. It was to the point where he didn't want to send Benjamin. Benjamin was, he only had Joseph and Benjamin with Rachel. And I'm guessing that Joseph and Benjamin had a different attitude. They seemed to be men of God versus all of the other boys. And so Jacob didn't want to lose Benjamin. And so he did not trust him with his own brothers, which is actually really, really sad. But if you look at the life of Jacob, he was blessed by God, but he did, he was deceptive a lot. And you can see that, deception is evident in his other sons. So I just thought that was an interesting contrast there. So verses 6 through 7, Joseph's brothers bowed down to him. And they didn't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognized them. He pretended to not know them. So just as Joseph's dream said, his brothers bowed down to him. They didn't recognize him though, but he recognized them, but he pretended not to know them. Verses 8 through 13. Joseph remembered his dream. He was harsh towards them and accused them of being spies. They explained that they are not spies. So even though years have gone by and it's been a long time, so even though all that time has passed, Joseph still has not let go of what had happened. And I'm not going to try to act like I would be any better than Joseph, because I know I'd be upset too. Sometimes people hurt us and they say things and they do things and we get upset and we want to treat them, how they treated us or worse. But God doesn't want us to do that. And so Joseph, instead of saying, hey, you're my brother, let me feed you, he remembered and he was harsh towards them. He accused them of being spies. He knew they weren't spies. And verse 14 through 17. Joseph held them in prison 3 days to test them. That's what it said. And to see if they were spies. They were to send for their youngest brother to see if they are telling the truth. And I didn't know at first why Joseph wanted to do this. But then as I read, I figured maybe Joseph wanted to see Benjamin without having to reveal, that he was their brother. So that was his way of doing it, I'm guessing. I don't know. It's kind of strange though. On verses 18 through 20, It says, on the third day, Joseph ordered one brother to stay and the rest to get his youngest brother, otherwise they die, he claimed. So he said on the third day, he gave them 3 days to get Benjamin. That must not have worked out, because on the third day, he said, leave one of your brothers here and the rest of you go get your younger brother. But even though he said all this, he didn't hold up his end of the bargain. He knew that he wasn't going to kill them. Those were his brothers. And so even though he was acting harshly towards them, he gave them 3 days to get Benjamin. That probably didn't work out. And then on the third day, he said, how about one of you guys stay and the rest of you get Benjamin? And so that's what he told them. Then verses 21 through 23. Joseph used an interpreter to speak to his brothers, so they didn't realize that he can understand them when they were discussing what they did to Joseph. So they were talking amongst themselves and they were saying, why is he treating us this harshly? It must be because, we threw our brother into slavery. So the boys sound like some years have gone by and they regret what they've done. They've had time to think about what they've done, and they are thinking that, they are getting, they're reaping what they sow, basically. And so that's what they are thinking and talking about. And they didn't realize that Joseph could understand everything that they were saying, because he was using an interpreter to talk to them. So, he's being deceptive here too. As much as, he wants to pretend like he has done better than them, he is kind of acting in somewhat, now not to the same extent, of course, but he's being deceptive as well. He's using an interpreter, pretending like he doesn't know them, using his power to his advantage, throwing one of them in prison and ordering them around to do what he wanted. So at the end of the day, he's kind of using that to his advantage and being deceptive as well. But, they were talking amongst themselves. They were saying that Joseph pleaded for his life, as they are now doing. They felt as though it was karma for them. And Reuben said, I told you to spare him. And I wrote, but did he? And I thought that was so interesting, because he didn't outright say, no, let's not kill him, because Reuben did have a plan to go ahead and save Joseph after his brothers had left. But he didn't outright say, let's spare him, let's save him. So he halfway did say, let's not kill him. But he didn't go through it 100%. He wasn't 100% clear and vocal about doing the right thing. And with God, he says he wants us to not be lukewarm. He wants us to be all or nothing. And we can't have 1 foot in the kingdom and 1 foot in the world. I'm sure you've heard that before. It's the same thing. You can't, love God and talk about God, but also treat others selfishly, act selfishly towards others, or treat others with hate, or do things of the world. God doesn't want us to do that. And so, I don't know, that just kind of reminded me of Reuben. Verse 24, it said that Joseph wept, and that reminded me of Jesus wept. That's the shortest verse in the Bible. But, Jesus has felt our pain. And so Joseph wept, and it had been years, but he was still hurt from what had happened. He did not extend grace. He imprisoned Simeon and sent them on their way to go get Benjamin. So instead of Joseph extending grace, he let that hurt get in between, him and his brothers, and just telling them, I'm your brother, send for Benjamin. Maybe he was afraid that, they were still deceptive and that they would, kill Benjamin. I don't know. Maybe he thought that they would, take the food and then just leave and not bring Benjamin back. I'm not sure why he did this. I don't know if he did all this just to make sure that he saw Benjamin. But he did have enough power where he could just send for Benjamin if he wanted to. He can send someone to go get Benjamin. He was the second in command to Pharaoh. So again, I have no idea. The only thing I could think of is that he wasn't having that grace towards them because he still was hurt about it. And again, I can't pretend like I'm any better than Joseph. When someone hurts me, it hurts. And yeah, I may act like I'm okay, but on the inside it hurts. And I hold on to that sometimes. And sometimes we just need to let it go. Let it go. Do we have to necessarily let that person all the way back into our lives? No. However, we should extend grace to them and still love them, because that's what Christ wants us to do. But he wasn't ready yet. Joseph wasn't ready. And so, he imprisoned Simeon and sent them on their way. And so verse 27 through 28 is the first time I hear the boys mention God. Because they went into their pouches and they found, we got all this food and we didn't have to pay for it. And they became afraid. And sometimes it takes us getting into scary situations for us to admit that, you know what, there is a God who is way more powerful than us. And I feel like that's what these boys needed. Verses 29 through 34. The brothers arrive in Canaan, and they tell Jacob what had happened. And so Jacob, when he hears of this, he knew the boys well. He didn't trust that they had nothing to do with Joseph's disappearance, and he didn't want to lose Benjamin along with Simeon. So Joseph is kind of like, okay, so you take away Jacob. I'm so sorry if I'm all over the place. So Jacob is saying to them, okay, first Joseph disappears. Now Simeon disappears. You think I'm going to send Benjamin, the one son that, I have left out of, my children with Rachel, who I loved so much? No. So he does not believe them. And it's so sad, if you tell enough lies, or if you act a certain way for a certain amount of time, and you try to, show that you've changed, it's going to be hard for other people to believe you. And it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. Jacob wasn't having it. He did not believe them. And so, let's see. Reuben said, and Reuben was the oldest. I feel like sometimes he tries to reel the boys in, and he says, you can kill both of my sons if I don't bring Benjamin back. Let me adjust this a little bit. He said, if I don't bring Benjamin back to you, you can kill both of my sons. And, I wrote, it's too late. The trust is already gone. It doesn't matter to Jacob. Jacob's like, I said no. So you're not going. So Jacob refused. And Jacob said, he is the only one left. And then I put, maybe he meant the only one left of his sons who are righteous, or the only one left of his sons from him and Rachel. So Jacob is at a point where he does not trust his children. Really sad, but that's how far that seed of deception goes back. And so I thought, reading this chapter, when I started off, I thought Joseph was going to be merciful and kind because he'd been so faithful to God and patient. I thought he was going to be merciful to his brothers and just tell them and, right away. But it turns out that, that seed of hurt is still rooted there. And so if you have someone that you want to forgive today, it doesn't matter if they're sorry. All that matters is that you forgive them in your heart. It doesn't matter what they did. It doesn't matter if they're sorry. You forgive them for yourself so that you can move on and start to heal. I've done many videos on forgiveness. I will have those linked in the description box. Forgiveness is definitely more for you than it ever is for the other person. And if you need to forgive someone today, I'm praying for you. If you have that, bitter root of hurt in your heart, I'm going to pray for you again. It is a process. Don't think that it happens overnight to forgive someone and to heal from past hurt. I get it. I totally get it. And I'm praying for you. But that's it for this week. Next week, of course, we'll be looking at Genesis 43. But yeah, thank you for studying the Bible with me. If you enjoy Bible study videos, I post a new one every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I can't wait to study the Bible with you again. Bye.
You and I, we got it.